Here we are talking about Blood Red Blossoms.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that we played into a couple of scenes. We played about an hour.
Okay.
And so it was right at the moment, and I wonder if you will recognize this, right at the moment where I was saying, time for the doom, time for the dismemberment, time for the ripping out the soul, time for the time for the blood to spatter the wall.
Okay.
And so the reason for that is that, and I'm speaking like this for you to tell me if I got anything right out of the experience.
Okay.
Which is that if you don't help each other, your chances remain at this die, one die with its fixed scale all the time.
Yes.
And that most of the mechanics only work if the bad thing that could happen is really something you don't want to happen.
Yeah.
And either to someone else or to yourself.
Yes.
And if the and therefore you will be burning fate points before, during, or after the roll.
Sure.
In order to ameliorate this, and even the young characters are not well supplied with fate points, so therefore the taking failures periodically to get some is, in other words, all of the mechanics are in play when things are brutal and desperate.
Yeah, tendentially, yes. That's where most of the system revolves.
Exactly, and so and then the scars are an option, in that context or not. And so I found that I was really looking forward to this, and I realized that your gentle medieval Japanese Studio Ghibli, the magical hills. The land of spirits, and Japanese are more spiritual than everybody, and we are wandering. We are pilgrims. We are not wandering samurai. We are pilgrims. It's going to be nice. It's going to be nice. And then you say, "Oh my God, this is the most brutal."
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Okay, good, because that's where I was at.
There's the reason blood red is in the name. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about your sense of process. I believe that you're actually already providing the game.
Yes, it is published. It was, it's a long story. The game was originally, it still is a Blades in the Dark hack. So it is Forged in the Dark. It is published as a Forged in the Dark game using the SRD for John Harper's Blades in the Dark. But at the beginning, it was a book, while now it is a set, a collection of 3 foldable sheets.
Yes.
It was going to be a book. It was going to be set not in Japan, but in a nightmarish version of Japan that was a dimension born of the suffering of the Sengoku warring.
Okay.
But the longer I playtested it, and it's been basically 3 years. Not constant playtest, I'm not talking about monthly. I'm talking about something like 10 to 15 different games, counting iterations.
I count reflection time.
Yeah.
So if you count the intervening periods between the playtests as reflection, it's still very powerful. So,
and the point was, I was becoming aware of 3 things. First of all, historical Japan already had everything I needed. I just needed to add a non-historical element for everything to work. This way it didn't look like it was too derivative. It didn't look like cultural appropriation, which is something I am very aware of, and I absolutely wanted to avoid, because my intent with the game is not fetishizing Japan. It is prompting people to research Japan
Yes.
on their own, the legends, the mythology, but actually deep knowledge of historical Japan is not required.
Right.
Because much like in Chambara
Yes,
movies
yes.
and stuff like that, we do not care about the Lord, like if the Lord of the Land existed or not. That's not important. The
Right.
point is that the kind
The,
of
the
human
opening
situation.
of the opening of Yojimbo is
Yeah.
just a short little phrase, which is a lot like the phrase you use. Period of warring states. This is
Yeah.
what this guy's going through, and let's go.
Actually, it's a point in the game. It
Yes.
says keep historical accuracy talk to a minimum.
Yes.
We don't want to bother about that.
Right.
We want the social situation. We want because it's a game of normal people dealing with supernatural and everyday threats. No village, no situation will
Right.
be, let's get together and fight evil, because these people have everyday things they worry about. There are no grown men to work in the fields. There are taxes. There is war. So
Are you familiar with my game Circle of Hands?
yes,
It
I
has.
am.
It,
I
at
am.
first glance, your game looks like Dogs in the Vineyard, and then at deeper glance,
There
then
are
you realize
many
it's a lot more
influences,
Circle
yes.
of Hands
Yes,
than
they are.
Dogs in the
They are
Vineyard.
both influences.
Yeah.
Burning Wheel is also a big influence, and obviously Blades in the Dark. But the point was, one thing I was realizing was I didn't need a separate setting.
Yes.
I needed historical
Right.
Japan.
Right.
Second thing was I didn't need everything the Blades in the Dark was providing. So one thing I wanted was the Blades in the Dark community, their interest.
Sure.
Because I saw that they were interested not only in the typical Blades in the Dark hack
Which is
of
a skin.
200
You skin it.
pages,
Yeah.
a book or
Yeah.
stuff like that. They were experimenting and they were looking forward to experimentation.
Right.
So it was the right community. I felt like it was the right community. And I also discovered that if I went to the core of Blades, so basically this range of results, and fused it with different things, especially the clock mechanic from Blades, so
Yes.
the rising tension, the rising problems, the consequences dealt with not as hit points or something like that, but everything is hit points. So
Yes,
everything
yes.
is a bar
Yeah,
that
that's
is
for sure.
loading
Yes,
or
yeah.
decreasing.
That's a really good way to put it. I like that. Everything is hit points.
That's actually on John Harper. Like
Yeah,
he
yeah.
says this in Blades in the Dark. He
Yes.
says, think of everything like a health bar. So
Right.
every situation is something like that. It's step by step we are resolving the situation, or everything is going to hell.
Right.
Here, in Blood Red Blossoms, my goal was to short circuit something of that. As you mentioned, if a player is working on his own, he's rolling one die, which means 1 in 6 is his chance to get away from the situation unscathed.
Yes.
Otherwise, things are in some way or another getting more and more complicated. Again, one person helping is a massive boost in your probabilities. Then there is fate, which is a way to manipulate things.
But
and,
go ahead.
and I did away with the stress,
Yes.
which was
Right.
present in the original iteration.
This is you have done the kind of you are inspired by Blades in the Dark, and then you have made your own game, and I think that is perfectly wonderful. Forged in makes sense.
It was pretty extreme.
Yes.
It's an extreme hack.
I think personally that there is a fear of doing that is quite common, that I find frustrating. And I often say to people, go ahead and, if you're so happy to be powered by the apocalypse or fate, part of Fate Core or something, go ahead and shoot half of it if that's what you need.
Yeah.
If that's what you need. You don't have to preserve. You can't hurt it, right? You cannot
I
hurt the
see.
mothership.
Yeah.
If you do, I can't, if you feel, as long as it's inspiring you, that's one thing. If you're feeling locked down by it, then, breathe a little. So it looks like you really went through that process.
Yeah, it took time, as
Yeah.
I was saying. Like I started with something that was close. Actually, many people told me that they were using the original version is still online. It was released for free as a playtest of sorts, and people used it to play Mouse Guard, for example. So because they kept the wandering element, the element of wandering, and there were some elements such as failure granting you experience. But what I realized people really liked was that, first of all, the game is played in self-contained sessions. You can play a campaign, but every session is like the 20 minutes anime episode, and the next session we are in another part of Japan with possibly a different cast.
There, do Circle of Hands all over again in that.
And it was specifically designed for those groups that don't have much time to get together all the time.
But you have the entry points to play. Unlike Circle of Hands, the entry point to just sit down and play is really, really nice.
I wanted a game that in 2 hours you could read it and play.
And I think it does so. Okay, let me go back to the dynamics that I saw. That we were talking about the difficulty of the die roll and the fixed quality of it, which I had originally brought up. And I want to emphasize that it is not just a task roll. Can I climb this fence? Looking at the traits in play, all the different qualitative variables, and the situation in question, we really enjoyed the fact that some of the rolls really only would go terribly badly at the very worst result.
Yes.
Because, frankly, I mean, this one character was an exorcist, was an aristocrat, was a strategist, and the situation that they were working in, even the worst, they rolled a 2. And even that just meant it didn't turn out quite the way they wanted. Even that, everything.
Temporary setback.
Everything was just lines down so far that even the really, really basic conflicts at hands, what they were attempting to do didn't work very well, but the way things were going really weren't going to be too much different. That was a lockdown for that character, as much as you can get in that game. Whereas in another one, you were like, okay, you are really out of your element here. This is it's completely flipped. Then the best you can get away with is this terrible situation. It's pretty bad.
Some situations suit certain characters.
Right.
Others don't, and that's why it's enjoyable to play the game as a campaign, because
you can feel the way that you do this.
Completely different situation, things are flipped.
And I think that in this, your 2 examples really laid that down very nicely. You had the 2 characters where the judgments of what was happening set scale. And this relates also to a German game called Direction Story Play. And that game is quite fascinating because it looks like one of these consensus, free-form, blah, blah, everybody talks, and we're just making it up, and we all love each other, and we love stories, so it will be fine. And yet he has this great thing where there is a die roll, also a pretty simple die roll, and you actually have a very simple matrix that you set up, where you literally set up the matrix of the possible random outcomes right there. So you actually create the table, the outcome table for the roll this time, and it really made the roll, it made playing really fun because you knew you were qualitatively constructing the table already, and it meant that therefore the game was far more randomized than initial appearances would actually indicate. And that's what's going on here when you are playing and just, I will free play until a conflict arises, then pick up your die. That's not what's happening. The so-called free play is actually really setting up the range of what that die can do.
When we get to the die, everything you said does matter.
And I find that very wonderful. It means to me the constructive use of randomization is one of the great joys of our medium. And I completely do not subscribe to the idea that the dice are just this leftover from wargaming that intrude upon the story process and all that stuff. There are people who really feel that strongly. I don't. I have a very different view. So in this case, I'm sorry that we didn't get to play the second half because I really found the build to, now this is when you can really rip things up. I have a question.
Yeah.
For those consequences, and let's say I am the happy Blood Red Blossoms GM because I am very excited now because the situation is such that I have a festival of badness
Okay.
just available to me in what has already been played. Just a festival of it.
Okay.
So the demonic adversary who perhaps was even inclined to help at the beginning, but then the interaction went wrong and it all went bad, and so now this demon is worse than it could ever have been initially. I just wish you had fought it in the beginning because now it's all worse. Well, this time the demon is going to reach into you and is going to rip away that trait, your kindness. The demon is going to rip out your kindness. And you will notice that I am doing something mechanically a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more sheet-oriented than if I had qualitatively if that had not been a trait, and I would say, I am going to damage your empathy, you're going to be a colder person, this demon is going to rip away a part of your feelings. And there's nothing on the traits that has anything to do with that. Then that's an ordinary kind of narration of an outcome. Here, though, I'm actually pointing to something on the sheet, and I'm going to damage the sheet by doing this. That is not really here.
No,
and it
that's
struck
not
me as
part
maybe
of the
almost
rules.
too much.
Well,
So is that
I can tell you how I would run the same idea within the rules. First of all, I think that's still functional. Like mechanized outcome such as that works. That's basically where scars come from.
Well, yes, but I'm talking here about the scars, though, allow the character to live when they otherwise would not. Here, it's just a raw failure.
I would probably use as the scar. I sometimes do this. I use the scar as a deal.
Yes.
Okay. So you can say it's going to rip your heart off. If you take the scar, which could be, in this case, I would probably go for. It could be maimed, but in a
emotionally
psychological or emotional way, or cursed.
Yes.
It's just like it would rip your heart off physically. If you take the curse, it's just a mission.
Right. I see.
So you can offer that kind of
interesting.
deal.
Perhaps I see how it could work out that way.
That's how it can work within the game.
Yes, and it's kind of interesting though because as the GM, I was actually planning on this because for the kind character, and I was wondering about whether I would make it just a qualitative statement like anything, like a wound or whatever, or whether I would make it like I would actually point and say I'm expecting you to draw a line through the kind. And I was wondering, obviously the latter is not an explicit option. So I was thinking, I wonder what we'll get there when we get there. We stopped playing, so I didn't. But that really, I thought to myself, well, I loved the idea of the chill that went down my back when I thought it to myself. And I was kind of looking forward to, everybody else getting to feel the same when this entered into play. And I knew it would. Whereas by saying, I'll rip your heart out, and then in the kind of, in the fullness of possibility of the universes, maybe they would choose to take the scar that way instead.
Yeah, in the case you suggest it.
Yeah, I know, but then it's a matter of me railroading into the choices and stuff.
I get it.
Playing toward an outcome. I was thinking, interesting. So, yes, this is something that.
Also, one thing is, at the end of each session, character can erase one trait and change it with another one. So in that case, I would probably go for you lose it, you can gain. At the end of the session, you can gain a new trait, but you can never go back to kindness unless. So you
I
would
choose
probably
to lose
give
kindness
a
and
a reset condition. If we want to be on the more hopeful side, or we can go for full grim and say no, it's gone.
So this is that there are some mechanisms to play with so that you are not being quite as brutal toward the sheet as a dice outcome. You see, that's what I'm thinking. So okay, that clarifies things a little bit for me.
That has basically to do with the fact that I really like for the sheet to be a decision of the player.
Right. Well, that's what I'm getting from your answer.
The
All
game,
of your,
this game is it's a siege on the
Yes,
characters.
yes.
I wanted to give them something that still feels their own.
I see.
That's
That's a
just
very
the
okay.
limit I wanted to, the line I wanted to draw.
That to me is very powerful because it gives me my guiding principle for decisions that I would be making about that kind of thing. So okay, I get that.
Like I think that the kind of intervention you wanted to do. On
Well,
the sheet,
it was crossed my mind.
Yeah.
It
No,
crossed my mind,
it's
yeah.
perfectly okay. Once you do that, of course, you set a precedent.
I know.
Which
That's-
means,
yeah.
hey, everyone, are you fine with the fact that
Right.
it can be at stake? Your sheet
Yeah.
can be at stake.
Still, though, I think, given what you said, I would prefer not to do that and just let the other mechanisms take care of outcomes of that
see.
kind. And to say, and you know what I would do, is I would say the demon will rip out your kindness, just like I said before, but it doesn't have anything to do with me marking anything on the sheet.
Yeah,
You know, and
I
then
mean,
the player can decide later,
the kind
at
of
the end of the
players I've
session.
had up until
Yeah.
now will probably go at the end of the session. Yeah, that happened. Like,
Yeah, exactly. That's what
come
I'm
on.
thinking too. And so, or perhaps more gently, they might say, and it takes me some months to get my kindness back
Yeah,
or something.
yeah.
And then that's fine. That's fine. And I still think the horror of it would be
Also, the basic difference between any consequence in the game and scars
Yes.
is that it can be months or years between
Right.
two sessions.
Yes.
Scars never go
That's
away.
right,
There's
right.
no way
Right, right.
to deal with them.
Yeah.
Everything else basically resets because life goes on,
Right.
and people forget some stuff. They change and
Right.
stuff like that.
Right.
But scars do not.
I'm all about it. I'm really liking it, and especially what I like to joke
I'm
with.
glad.
I like to joke with Michele that he is, the educated and experienced marketer. I am a terrible little street corner man, and so he has the unenviable job of trying to convince me, to upgrade.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, I really particularly like the elegance and strength of this object and of the rule set as a whole. Right? So, the object for the character sheet alone, but the rules themselves are not a whole lot more than the character sheet.
No, basically
anyway.
it's
So,
another sheet with the general rules
Right.
and another one that is very much about how to run a scenario.
Sure,
It's
sure.
what one would consider advice on how to use the rules.
Yeah.
This one is designed to always be present.
Right.
The game sheet is also always present. The other one is the kind of sheet that is read as advice and then consulted occasionally.
Right. And I think but it's an extremely efficient, and as I found in play, utterly sufficient.
Yeah, that was
completely
my
sufficient.
major worry
Yeah.
with the game because Daniele, which played with you, knows it very well because, and also another friend of mine, which is one of my Patreons, we had a lot of exchanges about this because he was the person blind playtesting the
Right,
game,
right.
and like the amount of time we moved certain, not really chapters but sections from one sheet to another, like should this be scenario, should this
Right.
be game, should this be like I did know what I wanted to write, but how to present it was the challenge.
I've been discussing this quite a bit with people, and one of the people today is early on that road. There are elements of play, like the last part of play.
Yeah.
You know how it is when you're playing a game, the last parts of play are always the worst in the design because you don't get there enough times.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so he's kind of discovering that now he has to play through to that point enough times that he can say, okay, this is how it should go. And I said, don't even worry about how you're going to present the actual game to actual people. You're going to start that process much later. Right now, you're still just working out.
That
the
was
engine.
the final step.
It must be the final step because otherwise you're trying to teach it and to do it and to explain it
Yeah.
and everything all at once, and it is madness. Another player another person today was exactly the opposite. There wasn't a thing in the mechanics or the procedures or anything that they really felt anxious about or had any desire to change, and now they had to completely reboot their mind to say, I'm not going to explain a damn thing, I'm going to instruct. How am I going to instruct this thing? And that's a completely different process. What do I do? And so you went through those.
Yeah.
And it looks as though you were able to keep it together.
I'd say 4 iterations.
Yeah.
It was before the first 2 were 2 versions with the original Blades in the Dark system and stuff like that. Then there was a third one, which was basically scrapped pretty quickly because it was the classic, I know what I want, I know what it doesn't work,
Right.
and then that's when I began chopping off.
That's
pieces.
when you start, refining.
Dramatically.
Right.
And what really helped me was actually the beginning of a series of events in Italy called Giochi di ruolo al buio, basically role-playing games in the dark, which is an initiative in which people go.
No, I just heard about this. Yes. The blind. It's totally blind.
Yeah, it's totally blind. People sit down and
Right.
they need to get the experience
Right.
in one sitting.
Right.
You don't have much prep. You don't know the kind of people, and
It's
you
also
need a
kind
game
of
that is.
stress teaching how to freaking get along. Did you come here to play or not?
Yeah.
And if you came to play, then
Yeah.
leave your damn baggage.
Yeah,
and
that's why I decided that for this kind of game I wanted to appeal to that kind of situation, and also the typical group of people that a situation that I know very very well is that when you have a group of players and you have a long running campaign of a game, traditional or different, doesn't matter, but if you have a game that works best on a long campaign, you can't have many games like that.
No, you're right.
But you really want to try different stuff.
Yes.
But if you try that stuff and people like it, then every time you finally get the chance to all be together, you have to make this hard choice.
Right.
This game removes that.
Yeah.
It wants to feel, it's like sand between rocks. Okay,
Yes.
so it wants to fill the gaps.
Yes.
Also because honestly, if you play this every week, you're gonna suffer some burnout.
It is. If I were playing this game and teaching this game, that's what I'm saying. If I were teaching this game, it is to say, this is a game where, brutality of execution is it's a virtue, and
Sometimes, yes.
and I think that. I think yes. After a few iterations, are you familiar with the novels from the 1980s? The first one is, I think, very late 70s.
Okay.
They are from a. Am I thinking that? Maybe a little earlier. They are from a fantasy author named Jessica Amanda Samuelson, and she wrote a trilogy of a female samurai.
Okay.
And it's the trilogy is called the Tomoe Gozen trilogy, which is also the name of the first.
I know Tomoe Gozen as a character.
Sure. And it's been mined. It's actually from Japanese history and legend, so It's been mined 1,000 times. And so Samonson's work is wonderfully powerful and very difficult to articulate in today's political discourse. She is a radical lesbian in Seattle who edited horror zines, of which I was a subscriber for a considerable amount of time. I still have all of them. And she loved sword and sorcery, pulp sword and sorcery. Robert E. Howard, Fritz Lang, Clark Ashton Smith, the works. She loved them, and she wrote this samurai trilogy. It is one of the last gasps of fantasy before it became the franchise of today.
Okay.
It is one of the last moments of that really powerful stuff, and she was fearless. Fearless about the character, fearless about her messaging, fearless about everything. and it's a tale of torment. It's a tale of torment. Tomoe and her story is a disaster to everybody and everything around her, and is a genuinely nothing. I mean, it really reaches into the bleakest of the samurai films.
Yeah.
If you were
Yes.
to look at it at first, you would say, "Oh, this is a lot like this, Yojimbo." At first, then you read it and you go, "Oh, this is more like Onibaba." Okay.
Okay, all right.
This it has all the violence and the adventure of Kurosawa and his films, and then but the void is sucking at you.
The darkness
this is
of Onibaba.
really hardcore.
I get it, and okay.
So I really recommend it. Because your game
Absolutely.
was like that for me. It's like, hooray, samurai adventure. Holy shit.
If we have to talk about inspiration, Onibaba, Kuroneko,
Yes.
video games like Kwon and similar, which, they go for the fantasy medieval Japan, but they are very, very dark and very rooted in human darkness.
You really recommend. Here, I'm going to write this for you. Really recommend
Thank you.
her work. She is one of these authors who has never really left the underground. The novels were, the first one was printed in like an art house publication first, and then they were printed as in the mainstream publication, and they did not remain in print. You can't go into the store and buy the Tomoe Gozen books.
I don't
just
think
sitting
they were
there.
translated in Italian.
But you can't go into an American bookstore and just find them there as evergreen publications either. And and in many ways, I think she subverted the easy to write female samurai trilogy, which you could just see in your mind. The easy one to write.
Which is also interesting because Tomoe Gozen is like the archetypal female samurai. So to do something so bold with this kind of character is especially powerful.
And she wrote some other books too. I've read them all. And she still is a presence in fantasy and science fiction. But really, I don't think ever got her due or entered into the fan-friendly culture in a sort of the celebrity way. And I have always said, I hope I never meet her, because this is one of the few people that I will turn into that embarrassing fan who cannot get a real sentence out and will end up like blubbering. I knew you were my soulmate, or something ridiculous like that, And so there's 2 or 3 people. I'm like, I'm just not going to try. Because a great deal of my book, Sword and Sorcery, is in sex and sorcery, are deeply influenced by her work.
I see,
And so people have often said, you should write to her. These are wonderful, celebrations. And I never heard of her books. I've read all of them now. Now that I have read your Red Sorcerer, you should talk to her. And I'm like, I can never do it. So, that's why.
I'll for sure check these out. Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I don't know if this was much of a consultation, so much as just letting you know that this is how I felt about the game, and I'm excited about it.
I'm extremely humbled and happy that, I'm really happy when people play the game and to have this kind of conversation.